Hi, my name's Liv and I paint things. For this week's video, I wanted to add another piece to my Liv wrapped collection. However, I wanted to do something a little bit different, so I thought to myself, what is the most ridiculous thing you could find wrapped at the grocery store? My mind instantly went to the packaged fruits you might find, like orange slices and melons, but I needed it to be more ridiculous than just sliced fruit. In comes the wrapped pineapple. I started off with a quick sketchy sketch. It was sketchy because I only loosely followed my reference photo when it came to the pineapple bulbs and the star-shaped socks they sat in. I both love and hate myself for doing this, as I do with almost any sketch I make. Part of me is like, oh yeah, this is great. A sketch makes the painting process so much easier. But another part of me hates past me for even drawing the sketch because the lines will be off or the graphite will mix with the paint in a really annoying way. Let's move on from me complaining about myself, shall we? With my sketch down, I begin painting the base layer. I used lemon yellow for the pineapple and permanent green for the leaves. The top leaves of the pineapple are much lighter than the parts closer to the fruit itself, so for that base color I used sap green. I also added some yellow ochre to the top and bottom of the pineapple and a bit along the sides. In last week's video, I mentioned that landscapes are an area I experience a lot of challenge with when painting. I believe I said something like, portraits, fine. Objects, great. I think at the time I thought of fruit and plants more like objects and landscapes. Yeah, I take that back. The learning curve on these dang leaves was so hard that it took me about 3 hours of trial and error to figure out how on earth to paint them. I think the closest thing I've painted to these leaves would be like hair or animal fur. Both of them have similar liney quality that can at times be very difficult for me to get down. The leaves on this were no exception. The nice thing about this, I guess, is it forces me out of my comfort zone. I wanted to quit this piece very early on, but I told myself, no, me, you will get this. Just give yourself another hour and you'll get the hang of it. And sure enough, I did. When trying something new with art, or really with anything in life, it can be very difficult to see what you're doing, judge it as being awful, and not give up on it. I know for myself this is something I've experienced a lot in the past. Painting over something or scrapping the current iteration of the idea entirely isn't a bad thing, but in my opinion, giving up is. One of the most challenging things about painting the leaves for me was the fact that the outside or the underside of the leaves were very waxy, so it makes them appear more white in the reference image. This was very difficult for my brain to wrap itself around because usually something underneath another thing will be darker, not lighter than the thing on top. I did some serious mental gymnastics, juggling with the desire to be realistic while also wanting to be pleasing to the eye. In the end, I arrived somewhere in the middle, where the final project doesn't faithfully recreate the reference image entirely, but it gets damn near close, and that's good enough for me. For the actual leaf painting process, I added a layer of white over the green base, which made a sort of greenish white. I would add more permanent green where I felt it was needed. Moving down the leaves, I would gradually add sap green and oxide of chromium, which is a very swampy green color. some of the leaves had dry ends, which I would add on by using raw sienna. I used a lot of raw sienna for this painting. Any dried or crispy leaves are probably like 90% raw sienna, 5% yellow ochre, and 5% orange. At the deepest parts of the leaves, I would use a mix of raw umber, that same oxide green, and viridian green. This gave me a dark, almost bluish color. Oh, and I also use ultramarine for some of the shadows. Two things I've been trying to incorporate more into my painting process is the use of blues and the avoidance of pure blacks. In the past, I relied a lot on black to create shadows, and I didn't work very hard on training my eye to detect blues. I filled out the rough pineapple bulbs I drew with some yellow ochre and some permanent green, with the yellow being centralized to the very top and bottom of the pineapple, and the green being used more in the center. This pineapple, if you can't tell, is very, very unripe and would probably be as big of a paint to slice open as it was to paint. I experienced the same, oh god, what am I doing, feeling when I started painting the fruit as I had with the leaves. Eventually though, I got the hang of things and figured out my flow. For the centermost bulbs, I used light green around the outside, some white and yellow in the center, and I surrounded the deepest part of each bulb with a mix of raw umber and that oxide green. I swiped these colors together to create the sort of liney, exploding star design I saw in the reference photo. I would then add to these some orange, raw sienna, and burnt umber where I felt it was needed. The star-shaped bulb holders are generally more yellow and less green than the bulbs themselves. For the bulbs closer to the base of the fruit, I would adjust by replacing the greens with more browns and oranges. Blue is a very interesting color because it's very common for people, at least in my experience, to say blue is not very common. By this, they usually mean the pigments themselves are uncommon. You know, the actual ingredient that can be ground down and mixed with binder to create paint. This is very true. However, blue, the color, is in almost everything you look at. Take for example your own hand. This of course will vary depending on your skin tone, but for me and my deathly pale skin, if I look at the back of my hand, I can see the blues of my veins. If I look at my face in a mirror, the hollows around my eyes are hued with blue. Even my eyeballs, the actual whites of my eyes, have a blue tint to them in spots. Another way I've experienced this is through the lighting in my office. I have those RGB TikTok strip lights along the ceiling that I usually have set to a cool white. When I'm filming, I'll have those turned on, and I'll also have my warm overhead lights and my warm lamp light. When I finish painting, the first lights I turn off when I leave the room will be the RGB lights. The color shift that happens is honestly hilarious at times because it feels like I'm thrown into this weird retro sepia-toned hellscape where everything is yellow all the time. Where was I going with this? Basically, blue is everywhere if you look for it, even if it's not as stark as the blue of the sky. On day 3 of this painting, I thought to myself, something is missing from this fruit flesh. Something is off. And then I realized, oh yeah, highlights. So I added some tiny off-white lines to the very edges of each bulb. And when I say this transformed the painting, I truly mean it. These little lines made it for me. I was finally happy with my work. On the topic of the use of pure blacks, this sort of builds off of my point about the prevalence of blue in the natural world. In the past, I relied almost exclusively on black for shadows. The problem with this is when blending that black out into the surrounding colors, I was often left with a very flat, lifeless shadow that isn't a very good representation of how actual shadows look in real life. The way I've been trying to change this and how I approach shadows has been by using near blacks like raw umber and mixing them with reds if I want a warm shadow or ultramarine if I want a cool shadow, as was the case with these pineapple leaves. For the package bottom, I chose to use analogous colors rather than complementary colors because I felt complementary would overload the image too much. Analogous colors are a type of color scheme similar to complementary colors, where you use the color wheel to make color matches or design choices. Complementary colors oppose each other on the wheel, so yellow would be complementary to blue. Analogous colors, on the other hand, are those that sit beside each other on the wheel. So for yellow, you would have green and orange. This is different from monochrome color palettes, which utilize differences in value, the lightness or the darkness of the color, whereas analogous colors are based on hue. So if I look at my pineapple as an example, the main colors would be green, orange, and yellow. And if I want to look at value, we would have the shades of green that vary from the lime green to sap green to dark emerald. I really loved how this painting turned out. I feel like I have this weird style of painting where it's not stylized in any way, but it's not detailed enough close up for it to be considered hyperrealism. Hyperrealism, in my experience, has been left for the absolute psychopaths that love to torture themselves. Painting these bulbs were already a test in endurance. They were so repetitive, I had to take multiple day-long breaks because of how boring it was. I'm used to painting repetitive things, but this was just on another level. To do hyperrealism well, you need to be realistic down to each brushstroke. So if we take a face as an example, you better be able to get up close and personal and see every single pore and every individual wrinkle. I just don't have the time or patience for that. At the same time though, I feel like my work is more photorealistic than stylized paintings, so I will hereby dub this style hyporealism. It's realistic if you stand like 10 feet away. The wrapping for this painting was also extremely difficult for me. I could have, say,
gone to the store and purchased a pineapple and wrapped it myself to use as a reference,
which in the future I 1,000,000% would do. But I didn't do that, so I just tried my best and used my bare naked eyeballs to figure out where I thought the colors would go. Wait, why am I saying this? When I painted the wrapping, I knew exactly where every single stretchy white line would go because I have immaculate eyes that definitely don't need the aid of any glasses and definitely don't struggle to stay across. Oh yes, I am the very best. Anyways, with all the beautiful wrapping lines done, I decided to add on a printed label to let everyone know, hey, if you didn't know, it's a pineapple, you stupid idiot.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it.
With the last letters painted, I added the background of the background as a blotchy, messy sort of sap green color with blibs and blobs of lighter and darker greens mixed throughout. I also cleaned up the sides of the wrapping a bit and made them mix into the background green so the wrapping wasn't so starkly contrasting with the background. I guess now's the time to get on to the final reveal. Would you ever buy a fruit as ridiculously wrapped as this? Or would you leave nature to do the wrapping for you? Personally, I'd go with the latter. I hope you all enjoyed this video and my attempts at explaining my process. If you did, you should like the video and consider subscribing. I'll see you again in next week's video. Goodbye!
Thank you!